Okay, it is now 1 minute past, and I promise to keep us on schedule. So let me get this started with a big welcome and thank you all for joining today's webinar entitled Digital Workers Are the Tip of the Hyperautomation Iceberg. What value lies beneath the surface? I'm your host, Jimmy Hewitt, also known as Mr. Automation. But more importantly, I'm joined by two automation executives who between the two of them have more than 50 years of experience in this space. They are, in order of appearance, Mr. Brian French, CEO of Salient Process, an IBM partner. Next, you'll hear from Mr. Matt Warda, who is the director of IBM's Business Automation Offering Management team. And finally, I'd like to introduce you all to each other. I had the opportunity to personally invite several of you to this webinar, and we have quite a diverse audience, which is excellent. We're joined by business leaders like VPs of operations, an FP&A leader in corporate finance, supply chain, as well as IT leaders like CIOs and IT managers, and those in-between roles like people on process improvement teams, RPA practitioners, business analysts, innovation leaders, and more. Regardless of your title, or where your company is on its hyperautomation journey, we designed this webinar so that everyone finds a golden nugget of value or two to take back to your organization. Now, speaking of your company's hyperautomation journey, let's get started with a quick poll to give our speakers some context. You have 60 seconds to respond. Where is your company on its hyperautomation journey? And while you vote, I have two pieces of webinar housekeeping to address. First, the way we're doing Q&A today. Q&A chat will be open starting now and throughout the webinar. We'll be answering the questions in the order received during the Q&A section at the 30-minute mark. So fire away and keep them coming. Next, and finally, stick around until the end, and here's why. Then and only then will we flash the QR code to claim your attendance prize, a $1,000 value process mapping workshop, complete with process mapping, enriching, analysis, simulation, and ROI assumptions. So please stick around until the end. Okay, pencils down, let's end the poll and show the results. And voila, this is where everyone is currently on their hyperautomation journeys. And with that, let's take a look at the agenda. For our What is Hyperautomation, folks, we have Brian kicking us off by defining it and explaining why digital workers are the tip of the hyperautomation iceberg and what value lies beneath the surface. Next, Matt will show us what IBM has built to support you and your company on its hyperautomation journey. Then we've saved 10 minutes for Q&A at the 30-minute mark. And again, stick around until the end to scan the Claim Your Prize QR code. All right, now that housekeeping is complete, let's dive right in. Brian, question for you. What is hyperautomation? Why are digital workers or RPA just the tip of the iceberg? And what value lies beneath the surface?
All right, thanks, Jimmy. We're going to get into all that as we cover quite a bit of information here. So thanks everybody for joining us. I know your time is valuable, so let's dive right in and start with the definition for hyperautomation. I'm just going to focus on the bolded words here since I'm pretty sure you're not interested in listening to me read slides. So hyperautomation is business-driven, disciplined, and involves the orchestrated use of multiple technologies. What you're trying to do with hyperautomation is accelerate digital transformation by automating as many business and IT processes as you can. And we'll talk about more of this as we go deeper into this webinar. So to give you a visual representation of hyperautomation, what we're going to do today is build out a modified version of Gartner's business-driven hyperautomation loop. This is just a brief overview. I'll show you you can get a deeper dive later in the presentation. All right, as always, with anything, you should start with your business objectives. What is your digital ambition? Then you'll want to do some exploratory analysis to determine what the vision is to reach your digital ambition. And then once you have that vision, you can hone in on the processes you'll need to change to reach your vision and do the necessary process analysis. And since automation should be applied wherever it makes sense, it's helpful to apply some sort of automation alignment framework to determine the best fit of automation with the various types of work being done. Now, Gartner's digital ops toolbox shown here has a lot of different tools you can leverage to scale to hyperautomation. What automation alignment helps you do is to align the types of tools with the type of work, the right work. So you want to kind of look at the type of work being done, figure out the right capability to match with that work and automate in that fashion. Everybody tends to focus on the RPA piece. And while our RPA is fabulous, its scale is somewhat limited, and you can't achieve hyperautomation with RPA alone. So you can get much more detail on automation alignment and in our hyperautomation video series by using the QR code up in the upper left-hand corner of this slide. Now we'll keep moving on here and get into what you get into prototyping and delivering production solutions to satisfy your digital ambition. This is what a lot of people are doing today, but where they kind of tend to fall off and not do as much is once you start to get into measuring and monitoring and tying back what you're doing to your business objectives. This is how you'd really know if you're successful here. And then once you have some initial success, you can begin to scale via rigorous methodologies, which should be a part of your overall COE efforts. And the thing to think about here is you're probably going to need multiple COEs, as there are a lot of disciplines involved for the different capabilities involved in hyperautomation. Again, our video series on hyperautomation, which can be accessed or you can see via the QR code here up in the left-hand corner, has much more detail on this. So as you move forward, you'll continue to iterate and optimize on your overall hyperautomation program so you can stay ahead of or catch your competition. And then once you've done all this, you want to rinse and repeat and thus start a virtuous cycle of continuous process improvement. All right, so now that we have a foundation for hyperautomation, let's discuss extending beyond digital workers and RPA. In a study done by IBM on the future of work, one of the key findings in regards to RPA is that 70% of COOs say they cannot scale automation, in particular RPA. And that's to be expected, as RPA is on some level just doing what you do today, but much faster. It is really just task automation, not process automation. And the quote here from Elena Christopher of HFS Research highlights that and points out how we're missing the opportunity to transform business operations. Okay, so that's great. So what can we do about that? Well, let's dive deeper into where task automation fits in transforming your business. Now, since our title is Digital Workers are the tip of the hyperautomation iceberg, let's expand on the fact that the vast majority of an iceberg's bulk sits beneath the surface of the ocean. And if all you focus on is the visible portion of the iceberg, you're missing 90% of what's available. Now here we're going to expand on a concept Gartner introduced called the hyperautomation spectrum. We're going to go deep here and create an inverted axis / graph that will lay out where each of the phases of hyperautomation lies on the spectrum. I'm going to go through this quickly, but this will be recorded so you can come back and revisit if need be, since it's quite a bit to take in one sitting. Now, keep in mind, the graph is inverted, so value increases as you go down, not up. The way this works is we have business objectives or your digital ambition along the right axis here, with our scale going from immediate savings on the top down to business creation / reinvention, recalibration on the bottom. Along the left axis, we have our degree of automation, which scales from routine to dynamic. And then along the top axis, we have the scope of automation, which scales from narrow to broad. Along the bottom axis here, now we have the breadth of processes, which scales from a single activity to a process or multiple processes up to a value chain. This axis highlights the scope of processes the different tools or capabilities in hyperautomation can cover. So now, as you move from the upper left-hand corner of the spectrum down to the lower right-hand corner of the spectrum, your risk, reward, cost, and business impact go from being very low at the upper left-hand corner of the spectrum to being very high at the point in the axis where the breadth of processes and the business objective axes can join. Now, this is where your business stakeholders are typically most interested in getting to, right? They really want to increase the business and stakeholder impact, of course. This is about creating new businesses or transforming the way you do business, maybe by adding new capabilities or lines of business. One way to think about this is to think about how Amazon, for instance, keeps reinventing businesses, and then think about like some of their a couple of their competitors, at least in the retail sales space. Costco and Walmart have had to do over the last few years to keep up with Amazon's online shopping offers. It wasn't good enough for Costco and Walmart just to say they're going to stay in the immediate savings portion of the spectrum, or even just to get to the middle of this and focus on just revenue or just increasing profit margin by a bit. They've really had to up their game and get down into the business creation and reinvention portion of this spectrum in order to keep up with Amazon. So it's kind of about adding new capabilities, et cetera. And what you've seen with Costco and Walmart is they've had to do some of this here to keep up with Amazon. So from this spectrum, what you want to do is, just as we describe in the business-driven hyperautomation infinite loop, is start with the business objective and figure out what's your digital ambition, what is it you want to achieve with your business, what is your vision, and that will determine the level of hyperautomation you need to strive towards. So if you're just looking for immediate cost savings with little to no change in the way your business operates, the tasks you're targeting are routine, your scope is pretty narrow, the arrow highlighted with the area, highlighted with the white background here is the intersection on the spectrum for you. This is where task automation fits. Now, if we go back to our iceberg analogy, task automation or digital workers is essentially just the tip of the iceberg. So what lies beneath the surface here? If you really want to move beyond routine automation and cost savings, but aren't quite looking to transform your business, the process automation level of the spectrum may be just the thing for you. So here you're still looking at tweaking existing processes, but you might not be quite ready to go as far as reinventing your business. Then as you go further beneath the surface and down to the lower right-hand corner of the axis, you're getting into transformational efforts. So as you go deeper beneath the surface, if you will, you start to uncover much more business value. And you also introduce more risk because the effort and cost to get there is larger. So now that you kind of have an idea of where you might want to go and where that puts you in the hyperautomation spectrum, let's figure out what tools in the digital ops toolbox fit where in this spectrum and what you may need to use. So before we do that, before we map those capabilities to the spectrum, I thought it might be helpful to look back at the tools available. And so we'll take a look back here at Gartner's Digital Ops Toolbox. These are the main capabilities we'll map against our spectrum. So we'll start in the upper left-hand corner again and work our way across the spectrum diagonally to the lower right. So task automation, this is essentially RPA. And RPA is really great at automating routine, repeatable tasks. That's the low-hanging fruit. And a great deal of the time, it brings basically immediate savings and ROI. So if you're here, you're already off to a great start, and you're probably ahead of some of your competition. However, it's getting to the point with RPA where it's just table stakes. You're going to have to go deeper into the ocean to stay ahead of your competition. Now, remember that statement from HFS research about the fact all we're doing with RPA is moving data around faster, but not really transforming processes. That's because RPA is not a process transformation tool. It's a task automation tool. As you can see from where it lands in the hyperautomation spectrum, it's as far away from the lower right-hand corner where business and process reinvention happen as possible. So let's move on to process automation. This is where complemented RPA starts to play a role. Complemented RPA just means you're now adding some other capabilities like AI, process mining, and document ingestion to RPA. So with process intelligence, which is a part of this, process intelligence, you can start to look at your processes for specific automation possibilities and analyze how those changes will impact your processes. However, complemented RPA is still somewhat limited on what you can achieve. It's really limited to simpler processes that don't span functions or need sophisticated orchestration. It can move the needle some on improving revenue or profit margin, but you won't be catching up with Amazon down in the right-hand corner, the lower right-hand corner, excuse me, where business reinvention and creation occurs. So as you start to move into orchestration across functions and business operations creation or reinvention, that's where you get into more sophisticated processes and the hard but highly rewarding work of transforming your processes and business. Now, RPA plays a much smaller role. It's certainly got a role, but it's more of a bit player here. Excuse me. So for part of this, you're going to want to look at existing processes and determine for each type of work being done, what the best automation tool is to get that work done. This is where the automation alignment framework I mentioned in the hyperautomation loop kind of comes in. Excuse me. Now, sometimes that's going to be RPA, but many times it will not. Essentially, RPA becomes just one possibility among many for completing the automation that you need within your overall process flow. Now, you could also start here to look at completely reinventing your business. And again, this certainly isn't achievable with just RPA. So you're really going to have to do the analysis and kind of determine based on what you need, what the best type of automation is for your needs. As always, it really comes back to your business objective. If you're trying to achieve more than just immediate savings and are looking to transform your business or even just automate more than tasks, you'll need to leverage more of the tools in the Digital Ops Toolbox. Now, for a deeper dive into all things hyperautomation, here again is the QR code for our hyperautomation series. This is a vast subject, which we're just touching the surface of here. So far there in that series, we have 3 videos, which are about 10 minutes each and go much deeper into the subject. We'll add more content as we find subjects we believe would be beneficial to you. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop and hand it back over to Jimmy before we get into how IBM's platform can help you with hyperautomation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Brian. And another reminder to those who haven't already asked a question in the chat, the Q&A is open. If there are any questions about what is RPA, what are digital workers, why they're just the tip of the iceberg, or what value lies beneath the surface, please ask away. The chat is open. Now, let's transition to Matt, IBM's Director of Offering Management for the Hyperautomation Platform, with our second poll. Please take 30 seconds to answer. How many hyperautomation tools are in use today at your company? Hyperautomation tools being RPA, BPM, business process management or workflow, decision management, capture, OCR, intelligent OCR, process mapping, process mining, content management. How many hyperautomation tools are in use at your company today? And let's go ahead and close the poll and see our results. And there you have it. With that, Matt, how is IBM's offering management team helping our customers with the hyperautomation platform?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy, and glad to be here. And thanks everybody for joining today. We appreciate the partnership that IBM and Salient have had for many years now, and great to be part of this. So let's just, to kind of build on what Brian was saying there before, and a little bit from the survey that was done, is first of all, I think we understand the value of automation, and then automation with artificial intelligence, and up at the top here, opportunity for $134 billion in labor cost value to be achieved by 2022 alone, from research that we have done. And that's really the gift of automation, right? Is that it gives us the gift of time and freeing up our resources to focus on those things that are most differentiating for our organization, right? And as we can see by some of these studies that were done, 84% of global executives have identified automation and AI as being critical to changing the ways they need to work going forward in a digital world. And a lot of that is due to the second statistic there from Forrester, and 2/3 of business processes broke in the last 6 months, right? Due to the pandemic, due to the changing landscape of our competitive threats that we have. I love the slide that Brian had on, competing with Costco and Walmart, with Amazon. We have these digital startups. We have to be more reactive. We have to be flexible and agile. How do we do that? But as mentioned as well, 70% of enterprises that were interviewed by ourselves and Forrester are struggling to scale automation. And one of the reasons for that is piecemeal approaches don't work. And Forrester refers to that as also a bolt-on strategy. From the definition that also we have from Gartner here, if we look at what hyperautomation is, right, we talked about the integrated set of core automation technologies with AI, spanning business process management suites, robotic process automation, discovery mining, and several others. We need a way that we can spend our time on automating the value chain, right? Looking at how we apply automation at scale. And when we say scale, it's really about the breadth of automation and opportunity we have within an organization between your front, middle, and back offices, right? And how we actually can take advantage of all the opportunities that are there, RPA being one of the great accelerators and entry points into that. Okay, so from here, if we go to the next slide, please. From IBM, we've been working for several years now and had this market for a couple of years, is our IBM Cloud Pack for business automation. So what is that? It is a consolidation and a bringing together and standardization of automation capabilities that are modular, but yet integrated into a single platform. So we can start focusing in on what are the capabilities you need for the problems that you have and when you want to solve those problems, so you can start small and scale, and you only need to use what you need when you need it, right? So that we can spend our time again solving problems and not worrying about how do I get my automation technologies all working together with a common governance model, common security model, how do I play operations, right? And so we come and solve that problem for you by providing all these capabilities together in a cohesive platform with common authoring from both a low-code business authoring experience and collaboration with also IT development tools that work together to really solve business problems and really automate your operations end to end. If we look at the picture here, we've got several different layers. The first layer is what we consider our automation accelerators. And our automation accelerators are our entry points, right? How can a company get started? RPA being one of those core ones right there in the middle, right? It's great because it helps us on that journey, that slope down, right? And how do I get automation started? How can I get quick returns on investment, easier footprints from both a cost perspective and effort, so that I can then educate my organization on how does automation fit for us? And then how do I expand and scale that down, again, across my value chain and my end-to-end processes, so I can go from digital workers to a hybrid workforce where I'm understanding how all my resources work together and can actually satisfy the needs and objectives of my organizational goals. We also have our process mining and modeling and our operational intelligence. And I'll go into all these features in just a minute, a little bit deeper. But these are the areas that we're saying, how do we get into automation? How do we understand where automation can be applied? How do we take advantage of and act? And then how can we measure and understand of what are the outcomes and how do we improve and then expand? Underlying that are our core automation capabilities around document processing, which includes our intelligent capture capabilities, our workflow, our decision management, and our content services. And all of these capabilities are actually infused and supported by our AI and machine learning layers that have ML models actually infused, or AI capabilities infused within their capabilities, as well as a common AI foundation, automation foundation that we leverage throughout each, so that depending if I'm in a workflow application and I want to take advantage of an RPA bot, I've got that capability at my disposal when I would need it. So again, it's how those things work together. And of course, it can run practically everywhere, right? Private cloud, public cloud, on-premise. We have multiple implementations that you can take advantage of that suit your organizational needs. Okay, so let me take a step deeper and kind of go through each one of these boxes and explain to you how we see it and what it does. So if you go to the next slide. All right. So if we start at that automation accelerators level, and go from left to right. First, if we look at our automation journey that Brian was going through before, we start with process mining. And what that is, the ability to easily discover, understand, and analyze your processes so that you can prioritize where you want to start and what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, or your return on investment from there. We look at that from how do we automatically generate processes given how things are operating, so pre-automation, as well as being able to also plug into our automation capabilities post-automation to really look at KPIs and understanding. But this is about understanding and prioritizing where does automation opportunities lie that are best for me, and how can we visually compare where I'm at today. If I want to make these 2B changes, what do we think those scenarios from a what if analysis perspective, so that we can say, okay, this is a good starting point for RPA. Maybe this is a good workflow. Maybe we need to provide some decision management here or some intelligent capture to augment. Then RPA, as we all know, are used to automate those routine tasks, both in an assisted and non-assisted manner from a human perspective. And it's a great starting point, right? From IBM, we provide this capability, as you may have heard in our recent acquisition with WDG last year, which has a simple screen recorder with an intuitive graphical design. We have built-in chatbot capability and workload management, so we can have concurrent bot execution. And again, so you can make sure you have the right set of resources available to complete your tasks in a timely and efficient manner. And you're not spending your time managing your bots. You're spending your time doing those other things and letting them run. And then finally, operational intelligence is really getting that control and using AI to get that insights for continuous improvement. So you can spend your time on managing your business instead of spending your time on just reporting on it. And we provide a series of no-code dashboards with KPIs, metrics, trends that are meant for the business to manage themselves and their scorecards. It's infused with the capability for predictions and suggestions, as well as our hybrid workforce management capabilities, which gives you an understanding of your throughput, team capacity, utilization rates, and what's your worker efficiency that we have. Okay. And then if we move to the core automations on the next slide, this is really the meat of what we've been talking about today for taking the advantage of scaling hyperautomation, taking advantage of these within the context of RPA, right? This isn't a replacement for RPA, but it's really augmenting the capabilities and extending the value of RPA investments that our customers are having. If we look at document processing, right? How do I capture unstructured data from documents? How can I capture it from voice, emails, and get that into a structured format that my bots can take advantage of and that I can manage in a more cohesive fashion. So it's very important for us to do that. We have our AI infusion within here so that we can do intelligent classification extraction, as well as a seamless human in the loop validation process. So if there's any confidence issues, we can actually use the humans to correct and then automatically retrain for improved accuracy and a reduction of errors and omissions going forward. Then we have all this content, right? We talk about digital, but there's still so much content that's being used and we want to get it in digital form, but we still need a way to manage all this content, to share, augment, work on together. So we have the rich capabilities that underpin all this whole platform and how to manage that content. And it's scalable from just thousands to actually billions of documents that can be managed. And it's federated across multiple repositories because we know that you're not starting from scratch. You're not going to take all of your documents and content that are spread through your organization and get them in one place. That's okay. We still provide the ability to do robust searching, security, and governance across those federated repositories in a common fashion and a common interface. The other critical piece of an automation strategy, and hyperautomation specifically, is around decisions. It's how do I manage my policies and procedures, view that knowledge as an asset. I don't want to hard code that logic within my RPAs and have to manage it there, but really have a centralized location that I can manage my policies and procedures that my bots, my humans, my automated straight through processes can take advantage of to leverage and make sure that I'm executing in a common way. And as compliance regulations change, my policies change, I want to change procedures, I can do that in one place. And then all the other resources that are interested or consuming that information just take advantage of that. And I'm not going to 16, 17, 100 different places to rewire a bit of script. But I have one centralized location that I know that I'm managing my decisions, and it's measurable, it's testable, and I have it in an intuitive, business-friendly way so the people with the knowledge actually can manage the decisions themselves instead of having it to be managed by a more of a technical, disjointed organization. And then finally, workflow, right? one of my core responsibilities for IBM is actually in the workflow platform. And so it's near and near to my heart. So if we look at workflow really is about orchestration of activities, services that we have. If those be human activities, if those be RPA bots, if those be straight through processes, it's really how do I go from task automation that was spoken about before and really get to that automated workforce across that overall value chain so that I can orchestrate all these different services from a request coming in from my front office, any type of data processing that's happening within my middle office, and then actually going back to my back office to actually realize and perform the actions that are required to fulfill the requests that may have come in, and regardless of the type of process that may be. And the real orchestration governance of that, so I can have repeatable, predictable outcomes for my customers and my organizations that are measurable, is going to be around workflow. And that's what really makes that happen. And in our experience, for those that have looked at hyperautomation and RPA, really the acceleration and time to value that they've achieved is when they apply multiple automation technologies together to support and extend the value of RPA. Has been the most successful than those trying to make RPA and extend it and kind of get it to do a little bit more than it was supposed to. So from a technology investment and kind of future proofing, we provide that single platform for you that you can leverage and be assured that when I need it, it's there. And if I don't need it, I don't have to worry about it. But I don't have to worry about going through that whole procurement lifecycle every time I need a new feature. Okay. So for sake of time, wrapping up here. This is just a study that was done with Forrester from one of our customers that looked at what's the economic impact of this automation platform to them, and how they realized that this is actually on a retail lending organization. And you can see, right, 675% ROI achieved, less than 6-month payback. And some of the quotes here on the right, and I'm not going to spend too much time on going through that, but you can read it for yourself. But it's really about not just automation for automation's sake, but really about automation being applied to just have differentiating impact and competitive advantages to your organization. All right. Thank you, Jimmy. Hand it back to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. All right. At this point, we are now at the 30-minute mark. We will start our Q&A section. We have several questions coming in through chat. We'll start those one by one. In the meantime, feel free to continue asking away in the Q&A bar. So our first question, this is a good one. Is there any risk of becoming too removed from data? As an analyst, I encourage my team to fully understand where the data comes from and how it's collected. Will automating this disconnect us from the data?
That's a good question. I'm gonna defer to Matt first on that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw you under the bus, Matt.
No, not at all. Actually, there was a bit of time. There's a slide I was actually going to have in here that actually expressed that and actually talked about the value of automation. And one of the biggest benefits is around actually having more control of your data, having better insight of your data, so that you can make better decisions, and then start actually using that as well if you have an AI or machine learning strategy. And one of the reasons for that is this: as you apply automation, everything that's operating, everything that's happening, and I didn't mention it here, is creating what we call digital exhaust, right? Which is a digital kind of footprint or leaf behind of what happened that we never had the capability to really harvest before. So we'd spend all this time trying to look for the data. And there's a article out there, if you read it, it says about 40% of organizations spend their time just trying to find the right data and put it into context for the decisions they're trying to make on where their companies need to go. So by using automation, we actually, in our case, from an IBM perspective, we actually are curating all of this data that's happening, all these events that are going on, and actually storing it into a pre-curated data lake that we can then use by our data scientists, our business analysts, and provide that in the context in which they want to consume it, either for our own machine learning purposes or just making it available to you so you can do further analysis. So I don't think it takes you further away from the data. It actually empowers you and gives you the opportunity to actually see data in more real time. And that operational intelligence I talked about actually puts that within the context of definable situations, KPIs, and metrics. So now you can actually respond to situations as they're happening and not just report on what happened. So you can actually affect them in real time.
getting more
Sure,
intimate
glad
with
we
the
had
data
Matt answer
with
that.
automation. Great. Brian, any follow-up to that?
No, that was, I can't add to what Matt said there. That was fabulous.
Great. All right. The next one, we'll see if Brian, you can take this one. Answer however you'd like, but what is the end game with hyperautomation?
Well, I guess I would answer that with a couple questions actually, and say, you know, the question you need to ask yourself as far as an end game is if that means, you know, when you stop, it's like, well, when do you want to stop competing, or you know, when do you want to let your competition pass you by? Hyperautomation is all about, at the end of the day, an old term, which is continuous process improvement, and so that's really the end game is looking at your business, determining where you need help, where automation would help, and doing that continuously and just getting better and better. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, what you've got to do as a business is continually improve. And that's what hyperautomation helps you do, is to continually improve, continually get better. And depending on what area of that spectrum you're shooting for, maybe even reinvent your business.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Matt, anything to add for your perspective? How would you describe the end game for hyperautomation?
I think Matt's on mute, sir. You're on mute.
Was on mute there. The joys of working in the COVID era is that I always want to make sure the external surroundings I'm protected from. Anyways, the end game for hyperautomation is are you achieving your business goals? I don't think there is an end game. You know, as Brian had mentioned about continuous improvement, right? We're always improving, right? You're never done. You can always make something better. It's really about, am I scaling? Am I providing the right level of automation for the opportunity that exists? The whole iceberg analogy that we had in this whole conversation has been about is understanding truly where automation opportunities exist and the ability to react to them and take advantage of them quickly, right? At the end, it's all about your business performance, right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you both. Okay, a couple other questions. We have, does a company have control over what data is being emitted from a process or task, or data about decisions being made? Does a company have control over what data is being emitted from hyperautomation?
Yeah, so if I look at it, I'll take this one, Brian, if you don't mind. In the context of the IBM solution, right? I get this question quite a bit. And so one, yes, you can control what data is actually emitted. But I always like to turn that a little bit on its head and say, why would I want to limit what data is being emitted? I want actually all the data, right? So that I can look for patterns and again, use machine learning models to identify things that maybe I haven't thought about. Really what the control level comes to, and I think the reason, and I don't want to put words into the mouth of whoever asked the question, but is, can I control who can see that data? Do I have the right level of security and data protection? I think that's really the question that the real root behind the questions I typically get. And the answer is yes. What we have built into the platform allows us to actually put data privacy policy rules. So one, you can control who can get what data. You also can control, we have GDPR, we have other things. You can actually anonymize data, pseudo-anonymize data, have data elements removed if it's personal information, because a lot of that you don't really need for machine learning and reporting and whatnot. So you can protect that data. And if you do wish, if you're saying, no, I don't want that even emitted at all, because there's a level of risk, if you're highly compliant and have sensitive information you're working with, yes, you can control that as well. So it's kind of two fronts. I can control it, and I can be assured with security and data privacy policies that I'm protected as well when I am storing that data in an encrypted fashion.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. Okay, this should be the last question. Are there certain industries or business models that benefit more or less from hyperautomation? I'll add to the question, if I may, question asker, are there certain departments within certain industries that benefit more or less from hyperautomation?
I mean, my take has always been that every business can benefit from this. I could be biased being in this industry, but I look at it from, I try to look at it from the business side, and running a business myself, and look, and always out there reading business magazines and stuff and finding out about other businesses. I just can't think of a business that would not benefit from doing this. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, it has to be salient helping you. It's just like, well, why wouldn't you want to look at your business and see where you can automate? And I'm not sure, I guess the place where it wouldn't help is if you're already completely automated. But then again, you're always going to be if we go back to the previous question, which was asked about what's the hyperautomation end game, you have to keep up. You have to be ahead of your competition. And so you're always going to be doing those things. And yeah, that's how I just don't see where you would not want to be doing this as a business in some shape, form, or fashion.
Yeah. I'll echo that with what Brian said, is that it's all industries, right? I think from that perspective, I think also if I look at the opportunity for automation, we tie it back to some of the discussions earlier around process improvement or process reengineering, transformation, whatever the term that you want to use. Automation now gives us the ability, like never before, to truly look at how do we want to do processes differently, because today processes are the outcome of what resources we had available to us, right? If you look at it, was highly manual because we didn't have automation. We didn't have this capability. So those processes were cemented in stone and are performed that way because of what resources were available to us. Now, if I look at what automation, hyperautomation can provide us with the plethora of capabilities that we reviewed today, is instead of me saying, hey, the outcome that I'm getting today is because that's how the process performs, we can now say truly, here's the outcome I want, and the process becomes the result of that outcome. And we can truly then really say, I can re-engineer, have agility, and use automation to transform my processes to respond to the results I want to see, and not be held imprisoned by, well, this is the way my processes work today, right? And this is the outcome I get. But flip that around and really say my process become the outcome of the goals I want to achieve. And I think that's the, really the value there. And every industry has that.
You're on mute, Jimmy. I know Jimmy's trying to talk.
Yeah, great. Thanks. We've got a couple other questions, but for the sake of time, we're going to have to rapid fire through the next couple of slides to close this webinar out. And with that, the QR code to claim your attendance prize is now at the bottom. What you get by claiming this process mapping workshop is a several step experience, starting off with mapping your process. Maybe it's a corporate finance use case or a marketing use case or a sales order to cash use case, accounts receivable, whatever it may be. We're going to start off by mapping that out for you. On the next slide, you'll see that there are several data points to be collected once the process has been mapped. So you can see on this slide who does each step along the way. On the next slide, you'll see which systems are involved. On the next slide, you'll see how long each step takes, wait time, work time, combined together to be cycle time. And then you'll see the problems that arise, how severe they are, how frequent they happen. Once we have mapped out the process and enriched the process map with the data, we have tools to help analyze that process, to identify automation opportunities or process hotspots, mapped to the digital toolbox of the 5 distinct capabilities of IBM's hyperautomation platform. Once we've mapped it, enriched it, and analyzed it, there's several scenarios that can be simulated for if we apply this technology to that problem or that technology to this problem. We'll be able to simulate different scenarios and, of course, estimate the return on investment of doing so. So that's our offer. If you like what you saw today and you're curious about what hyperautomation would look like within your business, for your team, for your process that's on the front of mind, then please scan the QR code in the bottom left corner. And on the next slide, this is what you'll see by scanning that QR code. It is not the actual process mapping workshop. We're not just going to jump right into it, but this is a 25-minute chat about logistics, the tools we're going to use, chatting about the use case, and then scheduling the actual process mapping workshop. And with that, we're going to close out. Thank you so much for attending and have a great rest of your day.